I'm preparing now to start the summit, and welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for joining us here today. Before I started, some of you probably already know me because you are my students, but please allow me to formally introduce myself. My name is Mahendrawati, and I'm a professor in Information Systems Department. I'm also the head of Enterprise Systems Laboratory at ITS Surabaya. I've been involved a lot in BPM, so this is something that I am that is very close to my heart. And also now my research interest is including entrepreneurial process management and inclusive BPM. I am also the co-founder of Indonesian's Business Process Management Association. Now, the agenda for our summit today is as follows. We are very honored to have Professor Michael Rosman to open our summit. So Professor Rosman's session would be until 8:30 for his talk, and then we will have question and answer for 15 minutes. So we should finish the first session by 8:45. And then we will have a panel session where I will moderate three panelists from SAP Indonesia, SSC CX, and also from Accenture Indonesia. That session will finish by 10, and then that will be followed by breakout sessions where master students in information systems present their research in BPM, and master students from School of Interdisciplinary Studies will explain about their practice work in BPM. Now, without further ado, let me first start with introduction of Professor Michael Rosman. Those of you who are involved in BPM must know Michael, but I think I would also read out some of his CV. So, Professor Michael Rosman is the director of QUT, Center for Future Enterprise, and a professor for information systems at QUT. He is the author and editor of many books and more than 400 refereed papers. He is also the editorial board member of 10 international journals and co-inventor of US patents. Professor Rosman is known in BPM field for his work in areas such as BPM maturity models, context-aware processes, process innovation, rapid process redesign, ambidextrous BPM, and trust-aware BPM. He has presented his work at all major global BPM conferences, and he is now the overall program chair for the most prestigious international conference on BPM, which will be held in Krakow later in September. Now, Professor Rosman is also the honorary consul for Germany in Southern Queensland. So, without further ado, let me invite Professor Rosman to give his talk. Thank you, Michael. Now I will stop my screen.
Thank you so much, Mahendra, for that beautiful introduction, and most of all for the opportunity to be here with all of you. Warm welcome to all of you. I'm grateful that you spent this morning with us at this wonderful event, and congratulations, Mahendra, for the wonderful work that you and your entire team is doing in this part of the world. I've been in Surabaya 5 years ago. I would love to be there right now as well, but I'm delighted that we have this opportunity to come together. I want to spend the next half an hour or so to take you through some of our research in the area of business process management. That is, how companies work. And a business process is ultimately the flow of items, procurement processes, production processes, the way we distribute or maintain products within organizations, small or big, private or public. Now, that's something we have done since companies do exist. Where we are right now, however, is a turning point, and this is why I call it the next generation of business process management. It's a motivational moment. It's an exciting moment for anyone who's interested in the way organizations work for an obvious reason, and that reason is that technologies allow us to do things we could never done in the entire past. To give you an example, what you see here is the so-called AI chair. designed and built a few years ago, is a chair where the challenge was to combine the requirement to minimize material, to design for logistics. That means to have productivity in mind, together with the idea of generating something that is visually attractive and appealing to our customers. And what we witness right now is that the focus is no longer just on productivity, but equally on what we call generativity. And so generativity, as we know, is a term that we often use for artificial intelligence. But I'm convinced that in the future, we will talk about generative business process management, generative process science. We might talk about generative enterprises and enterprises that do not just compete on productivity, but that compete on generativity. And this requires interplay between humans and machines. And so far, we looked at machines at elements to which we delegate jobs. We outsource tasks, we outsource the way the work flows. But increasingly, these machines have autonomy and the ability to comprehend and act in a way that even goes beyond humans. And it's this interplay of productivity and generativity, not just in a technological sense, but in a business context that is so fascinating. Now, I call this the next generation of BPM because we had these waves, and of course, they still do exist. So, textbook business process management. If you go to a library, if you read up on the internet, on the notion of process management, it's a discipline that deals with how we work and over time tries to eliminate problems in the way we work. We call them pain points. Approaches like lean management have been designed to take out what we call waste, bottlenecks, or underutilized areas. Six Sigma is the discipline where we eliminate variation, where we hope to process make as predictable as we can. And many organizations have adopted the notion of PEX, process excellence, an entity that is dedicated to taking out pain out of these processes. We have done this for a long time. We do this right now, and we'll do this and continue to do this for a long time. Now, one challenge we will see here is it is the race towards zero frictions, zero problems. At some point very soon, most of the processes we come across in insurance companies and banks in the public sector will be real time, will be digital, will be happening in the cloud, will be happening on a mobile phone. The question is, what happens when processes have achieved extreme convenience? And this is why I believe that the streamlined process that we're aiming for today might be tomorrow's hygiene factor. It is an expectation, but it might be no longer a source of differentiation. Now, in addition to looking at our internal business processes and workflows, not so long ago, organizations started then to look beyond the boundaries of their own organization. Rather than the problem, they're interested in the value in the eyes of our customers. And I assume that many of you are familiar with the notion of design thinking, engaging consumers, customers, citizens, patients, or students in the way you shape your processes. We don't talk about process models, but more comprehensive customer journeys. We talk about CX, customer experiences, or UX, user experiences. And along these processes, we talk about what is known as the moments of truth, the moments when we touch and get in touch with the customer, and the notion of how far can they look into our organization. We measure net promoter scores, and increasingly, but not very often, we allow customers even to press a like it button. So we understand what are the sort of process experiences they enjoy. Interesting enough, internal workflows don't have a like it button. And it's only at the beginning now in our research that academic colleagues have studied the notion of micro preferences, where you allocate work to employees based on their articulated preferences. Listening to all of this, that reminds us to what Henry Ford called faster horses, because also customers tend to look into the problem side of things. They try to work out how can the experience with the bank be facilitated, how can they engage with the public sector in a more convenient way. We call this the economy of people. So it's not the focus on the corporation, but on how people engage. And it's now that we witness the third wave right now catching up and accelerating. And that wave is not so much led by problems or external value propositions, by what we call data. Evidence over confidence. This is where data-hungry algorithms, machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence and all its facets, tries to make sense out of these data, tries to recognize patterns, tries to derive suggestions. And in light of that increasing capability, we not just focus on time and cost and quality and customer experiences. We need to justify why we work this way. We talk about responsible processes. We talk about explainable processes. And in our very own group here at my university at QT, we now talk about TX, Trust Experience Design, where in the future, enter new roles, like a trust designer, a trust architect might exist. And the key responsibility is it to ensure that tech-fueled, AI-enabled business processes are indeed trusted. And this goes back to what I said at the beginning. That's the place when organizations will aim for productivity and generativity. This is what my colleague calls the rise of digital minions. You know those little yellow minions from the movie, and he compares the algorithm with a digital minion that once controlled runs in the right direction, but you take the eyes of your minion, of your algorithm, and you might be in deep, deep trouble. So I like to highlight again, these are not three waves, three generations where one replaces, but one adds to the other. I encourage anyone who enters the world of BPM right now to explore the fascinating new world of generative process science, of trust experiences, of data and AI-enabled processes. Now, what I would love to do in the following, I want to give you three main shifts, three main observations that give you a better understanding for the difference between process management, the way we've witnessed it for a long time, the way we capture this in textbooks, and the way it's emerging. And the first one is to move from a view on the transactional side of things to conversations. Now, transactions you might know from, let's say, enterprise systems. A transaction is like a micro-activity as a starting point. Customer has sent you a purchase order. There's an activity, enter order, leading to a new state. The order is in the system. Transactions, transaction codes are big in systems like SAP, and transactions have largely described how we model, talk about, engage with processes. That also means users have to understand transactions. When you deal with your bank, when you deal with your insurance system, when you deal with a public sector entity or hospital, a flight booking, you comprehend transactions. You try to understand the next step. You try to understand the logic of the system. You try to understand the web page or the menu in your system, and you navigate according to your understanding of these transactions. We capture these transactions in models, and when we do process mining, we try to replicate, we try to understand how these transactions look like. With the transactional view on processes, users had to understand how these systems work. We are now at the tipping point where for the very first time, systems start to think, start to interact like users and not the other way around. Andre Karpathy, co-founder of OpenAI, and for a number of years, the AI director of Tesla, said a bit more than a year ago on Twitter, the hottest new programming languages is English, meaning natural language processing, our ability to use our very own words and make them comprehensible to advanced AI systems has skyrocketed. That means we see the birth of what we call conversational BPM. Conversational BPM means increasingly we're able to use our own language, and it doesn't have to be only English. When we deal with systems, process-aware systems, including related data. If some of you are familiar with enterprise systems, a system like SAP now has a solution called Joule, Joule. And SAP Joule is the conversation interface. No longer you need to understand as a user transaction codes. You can talk in natural language and say, what are the characteristics of the suppliers where we have outstanding invoices in the last 2 months? The power of conversational BPM is that it's not just a conversation that I'm having just with process information, the way we work, the way we procure, but also with external data. We call that context data. There's one thing to understand where a process is right now, where is a claim that a customer has lodged right now, how busy is a resource that is in charge for the next task, or when would a purchase order be completed. These are conversations between me and my process system. It gets exciting when you use digital traces, contextual data from the outside world. This is where large language models become incredibly interesting. I'll give you an example. We work with City Council here in Brisbane, and the context there with our MBA students was, among others, to redesign a process around rostering. Now, when our MBA students approached this process, they didn't know a lot about the context. When our period of 8 weeks, we roster field staff, meaning people who are out and about in Brisbane, look at damage of streets, pedestrian walkways, graffiti, public parks, and so on. Now, today, you can have a conversation, and I'm talking about a really unfiltered, open, large language model, ChatGPT 4.0, and this is just maybe 10% of the response you're getting. Meaning, a process analyst, a process designer can now capture very quickly the compliance requirements for a very specific process. And this ability to have a conversation, not just with process information, but with corresponding compliance requirements, is new. In the world of process science, that is a topic for you this morning, you can see how we move from a process management approach that was focused on capturing how a process works. We call it process mining, where we model or mine a process to understand how it works. We move to prescriptive mining or prescriptive process science, where we take these external requirements and we can capture when a process becomes non-compliant. Increasingly, pattern matching, artificial intelligence, historical data, we're able to predict what happens next. But most current and only in its absolute infancy is what I would call generative process science. And when I mention the term reverse process prompts, what I believe, very soon, it is not the user, but the system that starts that conversation. The moment we talk a lot about prompt design and prompt engineering, the assumption is you might come to work and the system might say, I found an interesting case of how a bank in Brazil is approaching a certain challenge. Is this of interest to you? Or what you can see here, these are examples, 4 out of, I think, 12, how you could fix an approval step. Now, you might have an approval step in your process, and a reverse process prompt wouldn't just wait for what you say. The future BPM systems will trigger a conversation. They will scan the environment for you, will scan for better practices, potentially interesting processes, capture new compliance standards, and will suggest to you they might go so far and conduct change anyone suggests, they will just notify you of changes that they've done for you. So that's the role of conversational BPM, which is on top of transactional BPM. And for a long time, we believe that data scientists' strong quantitative skills are essential. The rise of conversational BPM means we need people who are equally good with their words than with their numbers. And that's a complete new shift in terms of requirements when linguistic skills become equally important than mathematical or numerical skills. The second big shift is from what we know, automation, to what I call autonomization. And I give you a couple of examples for what I mean with the rise of process autonomization. In a typical business process, what has happened is we used, let's say, enterprise systems to automate tasks. A bill of material, resolution, for example, or verifying invoices. We, as a user, have delegated this to systems. In the second wave, workflow management emerged. So these systems now, when a task is completed, and automatically can identify the next qualified user. And then more recently, RPA, robotic process automation, emerged and was able to mimic the actions of a user. These are all examples for automation, where something that can be described as a task is delegated to a machine. Process autonomization means you delegate governance. You allow the machine to make decisions. And let me take the simple example of chess and Go as an example. Chess, as many of you will know, is a game where computers have beaten world's chess champions quite a while ago. But chess is a game that I can compute in terms of the number of moves, the number of alternative moves I can make. We more or less can calculate all moves and then calculate the best possible move. And that's automation. When I can describe every single task. Go, on the other side, requires intuition. There could be up to 150 moves in a game. There are a lot of alternative moves. So depth and breadth of the game is very different. So when we automate a task, we obsess with efficiency. We know that a robot is faster than us. We tell a robot what to do. We admire how fast they are. But we know exactly why they work the way, because we told them. In the world of artificial intelligence, what some of my colleagues call framed autonomy, we might just give them a go. When you interact with ChatGPT, you say, please craft a picture that shows a robot playing Go. How you do this, I don't tell. So we describe goals and not tasks. We admire the decisions. We would love to have an explanation. We might not always get it. We are at that fascinating point where it's not just a task that is executed, but a goal that we articulate. When we look at processes, often we don't know what the goal is. We describe what has to happen in a process model. We don't often describe the goal. And that again means goal design as an entirely new challenge. Process autonomization is when we frame a process. In technical terms, it's called declarative process modeling. We describe constraints and goals, but largely the system can decide, sometimes even when to start. When should I trigger a conversation with a customer? The flow of work, rules might be modified in light of workload. I might find new interesting data in large language models, and so on and so on. It's a tremendous tipping point that has seen practical implementations already. So in banks, autonomization occurs when risk assessments occur earlier. In consulting, of course, as you have seen with EY, Deloitte, McKinsey, KPMG, they're having these solutions who now take up autonomous decision-making. And of course, very prominently in the world of health diagnosis and therapy. Organizations who enter process automation need to ask themselves, do I have enough data to derive patterns? As I highlighted, old BPM was hungry for human input. Next generation BPM is hungry for data sets. That means I need repetitive data sets, I need recorded data sets. And we need to work out to what extent is it good enough for us to know it works, as opposed to when do we need to understand how it works. If in marketing you do an A/B test, it's good enough to understand that customers prefer green over yellow. In the medical world, when a therapy works, you better have an explanation. And so you can see that aim for explainability BPM will vary a lot between different industrial sectors. Explainability designers, explanation models that go hand in hand with process models will be of tremendous significance in the years to come. And that leads to the entire conversation. To what extent are humans a roadblock or desired in these processes? Third and last item I want to share with you is the transfer from simplification to sophistication. See, what happened maybe over the last 100 years was that we tried to streamline processes. With other words, over time, we took out complexity of these processes. We take out variation, we standardize processes, we take out humans, variation, manual labor, bottleneck, roadblocks, underutilized or unqualified resources. Ultimately, we aim for processes that are free of friction. And that was always the so-called North Star, the final destination of process design. It is only now that organizations start to explore maybe the future processes are slightly more complex. But for the very first time, these complexity costs are manageable. In the pharma industry, we have the vision of a batch size of 1, where every individual gets a very individual piece of medication. To the left is what we know, simplification. We take out activities that do not add value, that are done by manual labor, that lead to variation out of a process. We tend to eliminate to address pain points. We are at the tipping point where future processes are slightly more complex, they're more sophisticated as well. They will be hyper-individualized, they will target the individual. They will be context sensitive and understand where might be a certain consumer when they consume this process. So process sophistication for us is when we open up, enter new process design spaces. No longer is it a sheer pain point that causes discomfort, it's an opportunity point we try to explore. For the first time, we might be ahead of consumers in the design of our processes. And I just want to give you 3 examples before I close my session here. Semantic shopping. In the world of retail shopping, imagine an environment where you don't need to understand the ingredients that you buy, but like you Google or use ChatGPT, you would say, I feel like this. Autonomization. I want that type of dinner for 8 people, minimizing my budget, and 2 of them are gluten-free. That's what we call semantic shopping. We have retailers now who try to work out, can we generate shopping lists for our consumers better than they can? A bit like Spotify picks music better than you. So these organizations that compete on generating content. Augmented aging. We've got banks here in Australia where their customers have been with them for 30, 40 or more years. But slowly they might lose their banking literacy. They might not be able to deal with web pages or mobile phones anymore. The question is, can I continue your banking life at least as good as you can in light of the tremendous data I have about you? again, I generate banking experiences. I do not just aim for productivity gains. And last but not least, some of you might be familiar with the notion of precision medicine, where I tailor medical therapy to the individual. We see the birth of precision education, where we educate every student tailor-made to their individual interests, background, cultural or intellectual capabilities and constraints. These are all examples. In the letter, we would generate content where companies compete on generativity and no longer on productivity. And I believe that, yes, we are right now trying to witness what it means to do artificial intelligence. But artificial intelligence is not a means to an end. Artificial intelligence needs to be seen in context and needs to lead to value. And the move that I talked about early on, from a game that is focused on productivity to a game that is focused on generativity, might be some organizations harder for them than the notion of artificial intelligence overall. So, last slide. In summary, we are very familiar, based on what we've done over the last 100 years, with a productivity lens, where we compress, condense, cut costs. And it's interesting enough that a lot of organizations are using AI right now in that area, because that's the area we understand so extremely well. And chatbots cut costs in a contact center. What we will see is a generativity lens, like the ones that I mentioned, where new options are created for consumers, shopping, educational, medical options. And for the first time, we do not just have a new technology, we might end up with entire new goals. So in summary, I'd like to thank you very much for the opportunity to share these ideas. Mahendra, by all means, please share these slides. And I will also attach a paper that talks about this a bit more comprehensively. But I'd like to highlight AI is not a means to an end. AI will come with new design options that we need to understand to take full benefit. Otherwise, it's like having a new car and going back to the old destination. Conversational BPM, autonomization, and sophistication are not just exciting for our BPM professionals, but all create exciting educational and research opportunities in that context. I will share these slides. If anyone wants to follow up the conversation, here are my details. But for now, I will stop sharing my slides so we can use these minutes for a bit of a conversation. Thank you so much again, Mahendra, for the opportunity. Thanks to all of you for spending this morning here with us.
Thank you so much, Michael. Always inspiring. And I would like to ask the audience, if you have any questions, you can tell it in Bahasa and I can translate, or you can open the mic and talk directly to Michael. Anybody? If not, can I just start, Michael? Because you have a very good blend between mentioning about AI, but you are also doing research on trust. So how do you balance between the power of AI, but also how trustworthy is the AI? Do you have any opinion on that?
That's, of course, a very valid point, as you highlight. And I fear that this sophistication of technology leads to anti-new trust challenges. We need to work out what is trustworthiness, meaning what do companies need to do when they responsibly use AI and, let's say, explain how they use it, from trust literacy. That means we as consumers, are we actually able to understand if we can trust or not? A lot of work is focused on trustworthiness, where companies are encouraged to deal responsibly, or, as I highlighted, explain what they do, demonstrate where the data comes from, be accountable for their actions. I think we will see in the next months and years an increased focus on trust literacy as well, meaning not just the supply side, but also the demand side, so that users truly understand, when I deal with, let's say, large language models, what are my routes? What are my obligations? And I think the trust problem is driven by supply and demand. But right now, a lot of the debate is focused on the supply side of the trust problem.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anybody would like to ask questions? I know that you also are working on the benevolence
Yeah.
organizations that come up with nicely with what you said about augmented how you also involve people that are not my question is more like if you have all the technology is growing so fast, but in our part of the world, there are people or even organizations that are still lagging behind. So, how do you
Yeah.
think that will be how we catch up? And also, I remember your phrase from the very beginning in 2019, how do we leapfrog? Do you have any suggestions for all the practitioners here today?
Yeah, and I still believe that leapfrogging is the way to go. What happens right now that these systems are easier to engage with than the systems we had 5 or 10 years ago. 5 or 10 years ago, I needed comprehensive investment. I needed comprehensive user training. I think the cost to going live have dramatically been reduced. In the chat, I put one reference from a bank, the National Australia Bank, and they have a solution called Customer Brain. You can Google it right now. And what they do is a large, complex transactional bank is using artificial intelligence to facilitate new advanced conversations with their customers. But they're not just convenient. With other words, I want to open up a retail banking account, and here it is. It includes moments of benevolence. And benevolence means when I do something that is good for you, but for monetary reasons, it might not be good for me. Meaning, I might move your money to a higher interest account. You might have a data plan, and I downgrade you to the data plan that is totally sufficient for you, even if it means I charge you less. Benevolence is, again, where I do not just compete on productivity, cut the cost to serve, but demonstrates that well-being of my customers matter. And I guess the notion of artificial intelligence to sense when customers require moments of benevolence is a tremendous opportunity. It might be hard for organizations that don't have the same funds to always compete on productivity. But if you can compete on trust, if you can compete on benevolence, you probably could compensate challenges when it comes to productivity quite easily. I'm not sure if Mahendra is gone, but do we have any other questions from anyone? Anyone from Mahendra's team, maybe?
Sorry, I'm just disconnected. Sorry, I think I would continue from here. Any questions? There is one question from the chat room from Fahri.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you think an enterprise decides whether or not they want to transfer to the next phase? There are 3 phases. Is it about the complexity of the process or any other reasoning?
So that's a very good question. As I highlighted, well, let's say it like this. Organizations change for 2 reasons: urgency or ambition. They change because they have to cut their costs, and they're looking at artificial intelligence as a way to, let's say, cut costs in the way they interact with customers. And then cost is a tremendous driver why organizations jump to that next generation, or ambition. If I take the example I mentioned, National Australia Bank, the notion is what we call beyond transactional value. I want to do more than just running a transactions that you expect I can run for you very quickly. And the notion of using AI to do more than just fulfilling a transaction is a tremendous ambition that some companies have. And I encourage you as a BPM professional, ask yourself, is it just urgency, or is there any new net value being more benevolent, for example, that could motivate us to jump to that next generation? Because if it's just driven by cost and urgency, it is very, very hard to be at the forefront.
Okay, we have two questions, Michael. So first, there's a question from Pak Ahmad Rifki. While the use of AI is extensive globally, its adoption in Indonesia tends to be slower. We know that AI can make companies much more efficient. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, there are a lot of SMEs, small medium enterprises. Does this mean that we will find it increasingly difficult to compete in the future? How can we withstand the massive adoption of AI?
I think it's a very good question. We need to differentiate between the massive top-down investment. I take a software vendor like SAP, I take a consulting company like KPMG, who have the funds to invest substantially to build AI solutions, versus the bottom-up growth. I give you a very hands-on example. My very own physio has 16 staff members. They're using generative AI. And so here the notion is, for example, can I streamline notifications that I send to my consumers, to my patients? So what we don't want is that a doctor, a physio, or a teacher spends too much time in their back office. They should be customer facing. Delegating, even using Microsoft and other add-ons, tasks like writing scripts, writing physio instructions to your consumers, to your patients, is something that a physio with 16 employees is doing using accessible public solutions. So I think be clear that while you hear in the media of these big investments, even the one that I mentioned from the bank, they require millions of dollars. I think bottom-up streamlining of back office activities is something we can do very quickly right now, no matter how big you are. And you should do this as an individual as well. Some of my colleagues write emails, make appointments.
Okay, thank you. And there's also one here from Pak Bayu Waspodo. How to use AI model like Llama 3 in a business, in a simplified business process. Are you familiar with Llama 3, Michael?
No, I'm not. We need to work out, maybe before we look at the technology, why would we use it? So as I highlighted, is it compression? I give you an example. Telstra, a big telco in Australia, has what they call a one-sentence summary. So if you call that call center, the call center agent will just get a single sentence describing the context of the consumer, which is very different to the scenario where I generate, let's say, educational content. And I create optionality by, let's say, finding new suppliers you could engage with before you even know that you need them. So before you ask yourself, how do I use a specific piece of technology? I encourage you to ask yourself, why would you use it? And then you need to train these technologies. So Llama 3 wants to know, what data points can I use? And then you need to work out, do they come from the inside, processing data, process log files, or do they come from the outside? And if so, what data?
Okay, last one from Ocha. I'd like to ask about any metrics or KPIs should the industry use to measure the success of generative BPM implementation?
Yeah. So I think this is about creating something new. So the old BPM is very much about cost and time, cost to serve, time to serve. In the new world, you literally could think about increased net promoter score, increased revenue. If I'm a retailer that can create better shopping experiences, if I'm a university or a school that can create better educational personalized experiences, that probably converts to a higher market share revenue. So it's the top side more than the cost reduction that matters. And if you don't mind, yes, conversational BPM exists. SAP Joule does exist. Solutions like Signavio, a dedicated BPM tool, facilitates conversations. assume this is an incredibly fast-moving market. If we would see each other in 1 year, conversational BPM will have advanced quite dramatically. This is where you can watch the space every 2 weeks right now, but you would see how the largest vendors in particular put a lot of development efforts into conversational capabilities, because we don't want that system knowledge capabilities become a bottleneck to users accessing it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think we have a very good sessions. I think we can continue, but in the interest of time, I will stop here. And as Michael mentioned, you can also contact him if you have further questions after this. Thank you so much, Michael, for spending your Saturday to visit us here. Maybe next time offline. If you don't mind, we will have a photo session.
Yes, please.
And then before we moving on to the panel session.
Wonderful.
Aji, can you take a picture, please?
Okay, Bu.
Okay. All
Okay.
right.
1, 2, 3. Cheese.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you all.
And I
Have
will
a wonderful
be in touch.
day.
Thank you.
Appreciate the
Thank you.
opportunity. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Prof. Michael.
Baik, terima kasih Bapak